Hello, my name is Leda and I'm the founder of Dietitian Your Way, a dietitian network empowering dietitians and nourishing communities. Today we're speaking to Denee Bex. Denee Bex is an award-winning registered dietitian and CDCES from the Navajo Nation and is the owner of Tumbleweed Nutrition LLC, a nutrition education consultant company. She teaches her Native community about nutrition without judgment. Denee provides inclusive and evidence-based nutrition education for organizations which honor American Indian heritage. Denee, thanks so much for hopping on with me today. I'm very excited today to talk about your platform. Thanks so much for hopping on with me today. I'm super excited to talk to you, our listeners, about your platform, Tumbleweed Nutrition. So tell us a little bit about why you became a dietitian in the first place.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm very honored to talk about myself and my own work in my own community. I wanted to become a dietitian because, well, first and foremost, I like food. and and I actually, before I decided to go to Arizona State University, I actually wanted to be a chef. I found out how much chef school was. And it was insane.
I had
And
the
then I
same,
found
I had the
then I
same
found out the
experience.
hours.
Yeah,
I found out the hours of being a chef, and I was like, never mind, never mind. I don't want to be waking up at like 2 in the morning to be
right.
like, prepping everything. I got accepted to Arizona State University on a scholarship actually, and I was like, you know what, this kind of makes more sense for me and my family, and I didn't want to put that pressure on my family to
Yeah.
kind of help with finances and stuff. That's kind of how I ended up going to school, and I was like, well, nutrition is pretty close to food. But as I got more invested in the courses, I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like food can actually make you feel better. And that's kind of how I got started, and that's what I've been doing for the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. I've been working in Native communities. I've only been a dietitian since 2018 for the last 5 years.
Hmm.
But I did graduate from ASU in 2011. So there was like a long gap in between.
Yeah.
Um, because I wasn't even sure if I wanted to be a dietitian because, I went through all the nutrition coursework and it was very chemistry heavy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
definitely struggled there. And it was hard for me to get into an internship. But I decided, it's important to have Native voices at the table when
Yep.
it comes to nutrition and dietetics, because there aren't that many out there. And so I was like, you know what, I think I can do it. And so I kind of went back to school, retook courses, got my master's in public health, and here I am.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's so important for us to have diversity in dietetics because, of course, we have diverse populations that need diverse dietitians
Hmm.
to help them. So, question though, I actually had the same experience. I wanted to go to culinary school, and then I was like, well, yeah, the cost is not making any sense, and I got, to go here, so let's do that. Because okay, so going back, I think there's a lot of dietitians who may find it hard to complete the dietetic internship or to complete an MSDI. And for me specifically, it was pretty difficult to kind of put my head around paying for something that it was difficult for my own family. I didn't come from a background that had a lot of wealth or anything like that. So to spend $10,000 on an internship, it was a little bit difficult for me. Did you find within the gap that you had, were there barriers like to getting into these programs, and what were they?
Oh yes. I worked really hard to become a dietitian, and I'm really proud of the journey I've had because I don't feel like it was wasted time. So after I graduated from college, I knew first shot I was not going to get into an internship because my grades were so horrible.
Yeah.
My grades pretty much guaranteed that I would not get into an internship. So I thought, okay, I'll go back home and I'll work on a reservation hospital for a few years, get some experience, and think about if I actually want to be a dietitian. And that's where I found out, I think it's important for there to be native dietitians. And I knew still my grades were not going to help me get into an internship. So I was like, okay, let me get into a master's of public health. And this was before there was the master's requirement.
Yeah.
And so I got my MPH in 2017, and I was like, okay. And I graduated with a 4.0. I really
Nice.
made sure that I was top of the class. So then that way, if when I did apply to an internship, I could kind of quote unquote prove that
Yeah.
um, I am able to study and I am able to excel, even though my bachelor's isn't that great. I can do these other things. I mean, I'm dedicated now,
Yeah.
and always being haunted by my poor GPA. Um, and and I still didn't get into an internship.
Yeah.
I
No, it's
applied
hard.
again. I applied
Yeah.
again, and I explained this all in like my personal statement, and I was like, I'm dedicated now, and I've have the experience, and I even got my DTR as well, and I passed the DTR. So I was a DTR at the time. Still I didn't get it. And I was like, what the heck? Like, why is this so hard to get into? So I was denied the first round, but there's that second round that
Yeah.
you can, start reaching out to the program directors, and that's what I did, and that's how I got into an internship. And it was the one of those it wasn't a fancy internship. It was like one of those do it yourself. I forget what you call it, but you
Oh, like the
create
remote
your
ones?
yeah, the remote
Yeah.
ones, or you create your own hours, or you have to reach out and coordinate your own hours with all the
Nice.
different hospitals. So that's what I did.
I was
Um,
wondering about those programs. How does that work? Like, what was your experience doing that?
I I actually really appreciated it because I was able to set up rotations in which I had I was I wanted to specialize in. So there were some things that I could do, like get hours that focused on tribal communities. So
Yeah.
for example, like my community rotation, I was able to set up hours with a local nonprofit who did nutrition work. And I helped them revise some of their curriculum. And then it was nice that, I could do my hours in different locations just to see how other organizations worked. And so that's kind of how I did my internship. So I that's when I finally passed the registration exam in 2018. So I graduated with my MPH in 2017. And then, the few
Year
months after
after.
that was that rotation or the selection period with the DICUS. And then I spent the year off, or the year just doing my internship hours. And thankfully my partner was very supportive of the
Mhm.
work that I do. And he was like, well, if I mean, you got to do it if that's what you want. If you just got to go do it, and
Yeah.
we'll figure out finances later. And he definitely helped me with that. And I took out a credit card to
Yeah.
pay for the internship.
Gotta do what you gotta do, right? Yeah.
Gotta do what you
Now you
gotta
got a
do,
line of
and that's
credit.
that's how I
Yeah.
paid for travel, was with that credit card
That's the one thing that I
and
didn't
deferred
understand.
interest.
Like, going through the whole process was like, when you look at other professions, they have the ability to take out loans, like,
Right,
school
right.
loans
I
and things
was
like
so
that.
salty about that for the whole year.
I was
I'm
I
still
was salty
salty
about it for
about
years
it.
afterwards too. I was like, "This makes no sense," and I completely forgot about that detail right when you said about the credit card. Because, yeah, my mother had to take out a line of credit, and yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's one
and
of those things
and
where
it
it's like,
just
"Why?"
yeah, and it prevents from people in my
Yeah,
situation, like, who are native. We definitely don't have the best resources. A lot of us don't have really great credit
yeah,
scores to be able to do that, and in that way, I was privileged in that I had built up my credit score,
yeah,
to be able to get a pretty high limit credit card, and other people, they just don't have access to that.
yeah,
So I feel very lucky and fortunate that
same.
things just kind of lined up the way they did. Um, but a lot of it was also just perseverance and
Mhm.
crying on the side of the road like every other week. just trying to make ends meet, but
And now you're
I had to do
here.
what I had to
Yay.
do. Yeah, now I'm here, founding my own business, which is very rewarding in itself. And especially just feeling like I'm filling that gap for my community. And definitely I'm I there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but somebody's got to
Start.
start it.
Mhm. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about where you are now, and how long have you had Tumbleweed Nutrition for, and what do you do for Tumbleweed Nutrition?
Yeah, so I started Tumbleweed Nutrition LLC in 2021 when I was working for the clinic. I was an outpatient dietitian during the pandemic. So, and that was really hard. I saw a lot of pain and a lot of trauma and a lot of just really horrible stuff go on in the hospital, like many other dietitians, and
Yeah.
it was even more compounded because of where I worked. It's our communities just don't have a lot of resources, and um it was just really hard to see a lot of patients struggle with the environment they were in, plus COVID. And so I started up the company because I needed to keep myself grounded.
Yeah.
I was stuck behind the clinical walls, and I needed something that kept me connected to community. And so I started the company was because I wanted to help out tribal community organizations have access to dietitians. Because if you want to be a dietitian and you want to work for your community, pretty much the only option, the way you can do that is if you work for a hospital, either as outpatient, inpatient, or even they have like a community nutrition department, but it's always working for a hospital.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as like being a dietitian um, in any other sector except the hospital. On the reservation, maybe off the reservation, it's easier. But I wanted, to be back home. Um, and so I did that for 5 years, but the last 2 years that I was there, I needed something else to keep me grounded, and
Yeah.
that's why I started the company, was because I wanted to provide that access to dietitians for tribal communities and tribal organizations. If they want to work with a dietitian, typically they go to all the time, I shouldn't say typically, all the time they go to the clinic and ask for a dietitian to do certain programmatic things like presentations or cooking classes or
Mhm.
food demos, and the dietitians at the hospital are already overworked and understaffed, and
Right.
they don't have bandwidth to do
Right.
presentations when
And to
they
create, because it's easy, doing a food demo, but to develop the food
right,
demo is where it's
right.
very time
And
consuming.
they think it's like, "Oh, it's like 1 hour of a food demo," and
Yeah.
it's like, "No, that's like a week's worth of
Yeah.
actual work
Right.
of if you want it to be good and to help people learn the best way they can, like, you actually have to put in good time
Yeah.
into a 1-hour food demo." And so that's kinda where I was like, "You know what? This is a huge gap." Dietitians, like, these tribal organizations need access to a dietitian, and I know a lot of them have grant money, um, and so I was like, "You know what? I'll set that up then." I'll take their money. Just
That's
kidding.
good. No, that's good that you found a gap and you said, "I'm gonna take it." So good for
Yeah,
you.
yeah, and so I worked out my clinic schedule so that I did 4 10s, and I did on my days off, and on the weekends, I worked with community organizations. I was very adamant about making sure that it wasn't for my own Navajo community, just because there was a little bit of a conflict of interest. So I did a lot of virtual things or for other tribal communities. And then I kind of got to a point last year in 2021 where I was like, I got to choose. And I chose the path that made me most happiest.
Happy. Mhm.
Most happy. So here I am. I'm still less than a year of doing this full time, but I've connected with so many amazing organizations and amazing people, and I've had awesome opportunities so far this year. even presenting for ADCES.
Yeah, that's amazing. I saw that on Instagram. I'm like, man, go you.
Go
Or,
you
yeah.
presenting for Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics even. Um,
What was your
for
presentation about?
for that one was about just how to deliver nutrition education in Native communities. Just because people don't know,
Yeah.
I would mentor other dietitians on the res about how to talk with their own. If they're new to the community, it's really hard to adjust, because not only do you have to like tailor your interventions in a culturally appropriate way, but you also have to learn the culture
Mhm.
and learn all of the events that happen around food, to make sure that you're not that you're honoring their way of life. And I think that's really important. So I would mentor people, and I was like, you know what, I think we need to take this a little bit more nationally, and
Yeah.
start talking about it a little bit more, because there aren't really any native dietitians who have that national platform. And that's kind of why I did the Instagram, because I was like, well, I'll figure out how to get famous on Instagram. So that way I can like talk about it a little bit more nationally, and
No,
be
that's
that
great. That's
be that
great.
go-to resource.
That's awesome.
I didn't know of any other way. I was like, I'm a millennial here. Do Instagram.
I love it. No, I really, really love it. I actually have not I was telling this a little bit about this before the interview, but yeah, I myself have not had any experience with Native American population. So can you tell us a little bit about what that experience is like? And I guess what are some common things that you see? Even like I would say diagnose wise, like what are some common, I guess, things that you see in your population?
Yeah, so diagnosis wise, we're I always say like we're the with natives, and I call us natives for short, or indigenous, but I usually go back to natives. Um, we are like the poster children for all the chronic diseases out
Oh
there.
no.
And it's definitely related to a lot of social determinants of health, us not
Okay.
having, access
Access to
to
resources.
electricity, running
Mhm.
water. And how does that affect all of these diagnoses? And so the most common diagnosis I would see, or in my community, or for referrals, would be for um, diabetes related issues, but also, malnutrition related to cancer was also a big one, even
Wow.
just malnutrition related in general.
General, yeah.
Yeah, most of the time it
Wow.
was related to cancer or end stage liver disease or cirrhosis.
Okay.
So those were kind of the top three things I would see. Definitely there needed to be um, uh, more work done on what else a dietitian can do, because often the providers would just send over the diabetes, because they would think, oh, nutrition, diabetes, it's the same thing, isn't it? And I don't think they recognize that we can do MNT for all different
Right.
diagnoses, not
Right.
just diabetes.
Right.
um, and and that's kind of what my work focused on, at the hospital. So, but right now, as part of my company, I kind of work more on like how do we talk about nutrition or teach nutrition in the clinical setting. So I have like workshops, like 6 hour workshops related to just native
Wow.
nutrition, like
That's
specifically. And it
awesome.
gives you like the full like background and history, and why is it we eat the way we do right now. And a lot of it goes back to like history and our relationship with the government, the federal government, and all of these other social determinants of health. So I give you like the native nutrition
That's
101 class.
amazing. No, that's a lot of like you're basically having this like whole intersection of like nutrition, like
Mhm.
these are the reasons why, like history, politics,
Yep.
everything. This is the reason why we're here as a culture.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. So, and I do specific examples with my tribe just because, I'm Navajo, and I don't want to seem like I'm speaking for all natives because every tribe has a different relationship with the government.
I was just gonna
Um,
ask about
but
that.
we have some overlapping things too. So, yeah, I mean, there's that aspect of my work. So some of it is community work. The other work I do is I work specifically with hospitals and organizations focused on health equity. So I work with hospitals. I have worked with universities this year, just about how to teach nutrition in Native communities. So it's a lot. I feel like I
Yeah,
have
it is.
my hands
'Cause
in
you're
all
doing a
these
lot of
different
great work.
buckets.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I really enjoy it because ultimately it's going to help improve the relationship, the clinical relationship in the hospital with between providers and our patients, and ultimately it's going to help our patients feel seen and feel heard, and
Mhm.
feel like they don't have to explain their culture every time they go see a provider, which is what happens now.
Yeah.
And even for me, it's sometimes a little frustrating when I go in to see a provider, and I have to explain my whole culture before I even get to like the
Yeah.
issue that's bothering me.
Yeah, that has to be really frustrating.
Yeah, so I forgot what you asked, but
Yeah,
that was
it's
my
okay. We've
tangent.
had a really good conversation so far. But one thing that I was actually wondering too was, so a couple of things. So like the difference in tribes, like, can you explain a little bit more about that?
So the way that tribes work is that our tribes um are defined, I guess, by location and identity. So there are 574 federally recognized tribes
Wow.
in the US. So each tribe has their own cultures and customs.
Oh, okay.
Some may overlap just because, like, way back in the day when the federal government was rounding us up, they kind of categorize different tribes differently. But we're characterized by our language, pretty much our language. So like Navajo have their own language, and if you go like 2 hours south of here, there's Pueblo, and they have their own language. So there's 574 distinct federally recognized tribes, and back um, during first contact, there were definitely more tribes, but because of colonization, it kind of wiped out some tribes. So we've definitely lost tribes
Wow.
over the centuries. But with Navajo, which is what I am, and Navajo is actually a Spanish word, but our actual um, tribal name is Diné, and
Oh,
our people are considered the largest tribe in the United States, and then second after that is Cherokee, and then after that it just gets smaller and smaller. So um, yeah, that's kind of how tribes work, and we're considered our own nations.
mhm.
So I guess I mean, I don't want to, just for simplification, like
Yeah.
sometimes you can call me like a dual citizen.
Okay.
But just to give you like an analogy for how it would work, even though that's not actually how it works. But so as a tribal member, I have something called a CIB, which is the Certificate of Indian Blood, quote unquote, which
Nice.
kind of traces my lineage back to the original roles that my
Okay.
ancestors were put on. So I can say like, okay, this is how I define myself as Navajo, because when the federal government was counting all of us, my
Gotcha.
ancestors were on that list. And so every federally recognized tribal person has a CIB,
Okay.
and that's kind of how our lineage is tracked as well. So that's like the more Western way of tracking our lineage. We have our own like
I was just gonna ask him.
Navajo
Oh,
we have our own Navajo way of
yeah.
tracking our lineage, which is the oral traditions, and we have our clans. So um, that's that's kind of how I identify myself too, is I have 4 distinct clans.
Okay.
And the first two is my mother's and my father's, and we track ourselves through the women. So we're matrilineal,
That's
because
so cool.
our
So
primary
cool. Yeah.
our primary clan is the woman. So that's how we identify ourselves. And then the secondary clan is the father's. So my primary clan in Navajo is called Nanishtajatachini. And that means the charcoal streak division of the red running into the water clan. Um, and then my second clan is Maideshkijni, which is the Coyote Pass People clan. So if I see any other like Navajos out there, usually when we introduce ourselves, we ask each other like, "Hey, what's your clan?" Yeah,
That's
just to
pretty
see if
cool.
we're related. So if I find anybody who is the same as my first clan, then they are automatically brothers or sisters, my siblings.
So, so
And
cool.
so that gives me sibling rights. So
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes when I find people in the same clan group as I am, like I give them a hard time because I'm like, I can do this to you because you're my brother or my sister.
That's pretty cool. How many people are in your clan, like from your mother's side?
I don't think that's tracked. I don't
Oh,
know.
wow.
I don't know. Yeah, I just because it's an oral
Yeah.
tradition, it's a traditional knowledge, it's indigenous knowledge. We don't write things down when it comes to oral traditions and oral knowledge and traditional knowledge. So the way I know my clans is, my parents told me and my grandparents told me this
Gotcha.
is your clan. So I don't even know if that's an interesting thing, is I wonder if somebody's ever tracked it. I know they have, like, if you Google Navajo clans,
Uh-huh.
they have like the whole list of like all the Navajo clans out there, and there's like more than 60 clans at this point. But I'm not sure if like there was ever an attempt to like count how many are in each clan.
So
I know there's a guy out there who actually created an app that
cool.
you enter in your clans, and then if another person has the same app, it can
Uh-huh.
like you can kind of compare clans, and then it tells you how you're related.
That is really cool.
And so like we're getting more technologically savvy. I
Well,
haven't downloaded it yet,
I guess my
but it was just
question.
released like a few weeks ago.
Oh, that's really cool. My question though is, I guess because there's, you said 574
Yeah,
different tribes, right?
right.
That's been documented by the Western way, right?
Yeah.
So this is located all over the US. So does that mean that because there's different parts in the US, different tribes eat in a completely different manner, or is it
Yeah.
okay? So that
Yeah,
makes it
and
pretty difficult.
that's actually what I go through in my workshops, is like how are we defined? And so there's about 9 basic regions. Like,
Mhm,
there's the Southwest tribes, there's the Northwest tribes, there's the East Coast tribes, there's the Southeast, and then the Midwest.
mhm.
And our and the tribes kind of some are similar, some are not. But again, the language is what differentiates them, and the religion is what differentiates them. Or I don't want to say religion, but spiritual beliefs
Spiritual, yeah.
is what differentiates them. And so every tribe is distinct. Um, and even like in my own tribe in Navajo, like there's even so much variety in our own tribe, like from one side of the reservation, things can be done differently than the other side of the reservation.
Yeah,
And so it's definitely a niche knowledge.
yeah,
And
because I mean, it's kind of hard. I can't even imagine how you are able to educate, because it is such a wide variety of information dependent on location, language, spiritual beliefs, religious events, right? Or spiritual events. I can imagine that it can be really difficult to kind of uh, figure out, I guess, how to educate a patient
yeah,
of that specific tribe.
yeah, and that's, I think, what's important about my work is that
Mhm.
talking to providers and talking to others, about how do we deliver not just evidence-based care, but also um, culturally appropriate care too, without, doing more harm. And when it comes to our cultural foods, we've always historically been told that our cultural foods are quote unquote bad, and that we need to limit them as much as possible. And part of my work is kind of showing like, no, our cultural foods are good. And now there's a I want to say like a renaissance of eating cultural foods, and people are proud of it now. And
Right. I'm
so
Latina, so
I'm
yes, I
jumping on
completely
that
agree.
bandwagon and
Yes,
saying
yes,
like,
yes.
as a dietitian, yes, these are foods that can nourish us. And so that's kind of where I'm at now, and that's what my Instagram is all about, is just kind of celebrating those cultural foods and making it known that this isn't something you have to be ashamed about,
Yeah,
for eating.
yeah. What are
Because
some cultural foods that are popular for your, I guess, tribe or for Native Americans in general?
um so for my tribe, and again, that's why I like to just focus back on my tribe, because I don't know anything about Northwest tribes. I don't know anything about Southeast
Yeah,
tribes. I know like general stuff, but I don't know like all of these
yeah,
nuances and cultural customs. So for my
yeah.
tribe, I'm a Southwest tribe. So a lot of the Southwest tribes, we grow corn, and actually a lot of tribes, they grow corn as well, and they've developed their own strains over the thousands of years. Um, and so for Navajo, we have our own strains, and so we incorporate a lot of corn into our dishes. And corn is also considered like a sacred food too.
Wow.
And so um, um, we have a lot of corn-based dishes. So something like blue corn mush, which is made from ground blue cornmeal. And that's actually, a lot of indigenous foods are actually the basis for a lot of like regional national foods, like, grits. That's an indigenous food, but
Yeah,
people just kind of associate it with the
right,
South. But it's like,
right,
that was actually an indigenous food.
right, right.
um, but for us, blue corn mush, it's called, in Navajo, it's called toshchin. Um, and that one's made from ground blue cornmeal, and we add in juniper tree ash, and that actually increases the calcium content of that food. It
Wow.
actually helps with the nixtamalization to release certain nutrients. And so when I would counsel people and they would say, oh, it's a typical breakfast for people out here, to have blue corn mush in the morning or white corn mush. And I would ask, like, do you add in the juniper ash? Because that kind of helps make sure that there's extra nutrition in there. And a lot of us natives are lactose intolerant.
Mm,
And so that's just a different calcium source for
wow.
people. So just things like that, like little nuances like that, and understanding and about the different nutrient profiles of certain foods. Other cultural foods, like in my tribe, would be like sheep, or mutton, lamb. That's a really big um,
What's
indigenous like food, and I won't say it's indigenous because it was
right?
introduced by the Spanish in the 1500s. But since the 1500s, we've really incorporated it into our own traditions and our own communities.
I like how you intersect like the history of food with nutrition
Yeah.
because, I think, with cultures and just around the world, we have all these different meshes of food here in the United States because obviously the melting pot of cultures. But it's so interesting to hear like I guess how one culture influenced the other culture, influenced the other culture. I think that's just pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and I think it's good I think it's important to respect that,
Hmm.
because a lot of times people say like, and sometimes I do get flack for it on Instagram when I call certain foods cultural, like fry bread. And people are like, that's not cultural food. And I'm like, well, it's part of our culture, right? Like, you could consider, I'm like, of course we're not like,
It's hard. I mean,
picking
it's hard
fry
to
bread
be.
from trees, and it's not an indigenous food, but there still is that historical connection and
Yeah.
that cultural connection to food. When we go home to our grandmas and our aunties and our uncles' houses, there's always going to be a pile of fry bread right there. So yeah, it's not an indigenous food. Um, it's not food like we went out and, picked from the ground, but it is, because
Yeah.
of that history, there still is that cultural tie. And I think that's really important, is what's often missed. When we're talking about nutrition in Native communities, is understanding that history. And this is why our communities eat this way.
Yeah.
It's just not because of, it just happened in isolation and in a silo. It's like there's reasons
Right.
why these foods exist in our communities, and why they hold certain cultural significance. So I really like food history too. That's just me.
Yeah, I
Like
think that's such a
I
cool thing that you provide, because I don't think I've ever heard of a dietitian who provides a food history. So that's very niche and interesting. And I mean, I feel like you should have like a whole blog based off of this. Like,
I've been meaning to do more like history stuff on my Instagram, but there's like so many things I want to put on
so
my
many things.
Instagram, but
That's the
it's
life
just
of an
like
entrepreneur. It's like,
one at a time.
right, right, right.
And
That's
sometimes
the
I
life of an
do.
entrepreneur, though. It's more so like, where do I dedicate my time over the next couple of days? Because, you could literally be like, yeah, I could do this and I could do that and I could do this. And your list just becomes like never ending.
Yeah, yeah. I really like food history. Like anytime I go on vacation, like I always think like, is there a food factory anywhere I can nearby I could take a tour of? I just really enjoy it. Like it's, when I went to Vermont, I went to Ben and Jerry's ice cream factory. That was so fun. And then
Yeah.
I went to like a cheese farm, a dairy farm. That was fun for me. And so I really like understanding like the how and why of certain foods, and yeah,
Yeah. No,
getting
that's
into
pretty
all
cool.
that.
Really, really difficult for someone who isn't culturally aware or doesn't know the foods. So I can imagine being, a Native American dietitian and helping patients. As a patient, they'd probably feel so heard, so well understood, and probably feel so relieved, to have somebody like you.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. You would assume that people would want
Oh,
to meet
okay.
with me. But when I first became a dietitian and I started working at the hospital, I had a really interesting conversation with one of my potential patients. And they specifically asked if I was Navajo. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, I don't want a Navajo dietitian.
No way.
Is there a white person there I can talk to?
What?
And so, and you can definitely, there was a lot of internalized racism there, a lot of
Yeah.
internalized colonization there. And so sometimes it's a mixed bag. Um, and it can be tough working for your community when you get that kind of pushback too, and
For
saying,
sure.
like having to deal with some of some of that
Yeah, no, that has to be
after
really
effects of
hard.
colonization. Um but I think that's why it's even more important to kind of be out there, is because it's like, us native people are capable too. It's interesting. I mean, and that was just like one instance. That wasn't like, the whole my
Yeah,
whole experience, but for the most part, people were very grateful that we can talk about traditional foods and
mhm,
not feel like they're feeling shame. There were definitely
yeah,
a lot of really deep conversations I had with my own patients, um, where they would become pretty emotional talking about how important their cultural foods are to them. To
yeah,
if they got diagnosed with diabetes, it's still important for them to participate in certain food events.
yeah,
And whereas like their previous providers who weren't natives or weren't dietitians, they would tell them to stop eating that, and it was emotionally and spiritually damaging for all of these people. And that's how we just continue this harm, is just thinking
right.
just because it doesn't look like a quote unquote Mediterranean diet or a Western healthy quote unquote diet or the DASH diet
Right.
doesn't mean that it's automatically bad for us.
Right.
And that gets back to the evidence-based, where, it's hard for me to say sometimes that I'm evidence-based because there isn't much evidence on indigenous diets,
You bring such a good point.
and
Like, that's mind-blowing. It
yeah,
really is because yeah, I mean, where now I'm kind of like thinking like, where do these research studies come from and what is the population that is being researched upon, right? Is
yeah,
it right?
right.
And
And
so
whose evidence is it? And the evidence that the current nutrition evidence is mostly, you know, white people.
yeah,
And there and there's a lot of different, there's a backstory to why there may not be a lot of evidence too, and a lot of tribes kind of have this negative association to having research done in their communities because in the past we were experimented on, we were
right,
sterilized, we were
right,
studied, and
right,
and it was really bad. So a lot of tribes have kind of set up really difficult pathways for any research to be done in tribal communities just because of that history. And again, going back to history,
right, right,
um, and so it's, for me, it's like when I say evidence based, sometimes I do have to acknowledge that there just isn't enough evidence, and so I that's when I have to use my own lived experiences of working on the reservation to inform how I deliver nutrition education in my communities. That also respects, our history and our heritage and our cultural beliefs and our spiritual beliefs and our
right.
um, so that's kind of like the difficult position I'm in sometimes too, because the doctor would want me to talk about the DASH diet or becoming vegetarian
Right,
because it's
right.
quote unquote evidence based, and it's like, are you not understanding like whose evidence this is based on? Like, I'm not going to be telling grandma to go eat hummus. Like, that's not realistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like fish, if fish is taboo in your tribe, which it is for my tribe.
Yeah, it's
Eating
definitely can't put
seafood
them on
is
a Mediterranean
taboo.
diet.
Yeah.
Definitely
And
not.
so it's like all these little like niche things, and that's why it's like if I were to go be a dietitian in another tribal community, it's that would be a culture shock for me too, because I know nothing about that tribe. I know
Yeah,
nothing about the culture. Um, we may have a little bit of similarities about like, our relationship to food and our relationship to agriculture, but past that, like I don't know any of those nuances, and that's kind of what my goal is to have that representation out there, like indigenous people can be dietitians too,
yeah.
and there needs to be more of us because right now there's over like 100,000 dietitians in the United States.
Mhm,
Less than half of a percent identify as indigenous,
mhm.
and compare that to like the general demographics, about 3% of people in the US identify as indigenous. So it's like, can we just at least increase it to like the 3%,
Yeah,
so that it
actually,
reflects the national statistics. So because yeah, I know a lot about Navajo food relationship and beliefs and all of this other stuff and customs and taboos, but I don't know anything about other
other
tribes.
tribes, yeah. That's actually the reason why, I designed Dietitian Your Way was actually with the customer in mind because I truly think that someone who is speaking to somebody, a provider, a dietitian in their own language, or who knows and understands their culture, or who knows the food, and of course, this isn't gonna be 10 times out of 10 times that's going to be possible for the patient to speak to somebody who speaks their language or the native language, right? But that's the whole reason why I came up with Dietitian Way because I'm like, there has to be an easier way for someone to be able to kind of look for the dietitian that they want to work with, right? And specifically, like if are more dietitians out there who are from different native tribes or who are from different cultures, that they can go and search for the dietitian who they feel more comfortable with because how many times have I counseled patients who, speak Spanish, and when they get on the phone and they realize they're talking to somebody who speaks Spanish, they're like, "Whew, I feel so much
Mhm.
better. Like I can communicate so much clearer, and you're going to understand what kind of foods, I eat, right?" So I think that's so important, right? For patients to be able to speak to providers like you, like me, who understand the culture, who can speak the language. And you're right, there needs to be more dietitians like you, right, with different tribes as well, so that we can actually push forward in those specific tribes as well and help the communities in those specific tribes. Super, super, super important.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important. And, going back to evidence base is like the evidence says when a patient or a client identifies better with the provider, like it's more productive,
Yep.
and the care or the patient outcomes are improved and the patient satisfaction score improves,
Yep.
because they feel heard, they feel understood. They don't feel like a number. And a lot of our patients in my community, they feel like numbers. And so why would they want to go seek healthcare where they're just treated like a number?
Yeah.
And that's why
Yeah.
a lot of our patients just don't want to come to the hospital. So
But I
yeah, I
also,
think there needs to be a better understanding of how to deliver
mhm,
nutrition in my own community, in Native communities.
yeah, I agree. So tell us a little bit about what are you doing currently for Tumbleweed Nutrition?
Oh man, it's a long list.
All right,
I
top
don't even know what I'm
three.
doing for Tumbleweed Nutrition.
I love the honesty.
So my top 3 services, that I focus in on, like I said, I wanna work with tribal organizations, or I am, not I want to, but I am,
Yeah.
but, the top 3 things that I do are presentations.
Okay.
Um, I do, like, one-hour presentations, or I do those workshops, or I also do motivational interviewing training. Um, and and then I do food demos and cooking classes. And then when I work with tribally owned farms, I do recipe development for them. So if they have a certain product that they want to showcase, then they ask me if I can develop a recipe for them, featuring their products. So like I said, many different things. But
Okay.
those are kind of like my top 4 is presentations, food demos, cooking classes, and recipe development. Um, I've done other work with like other local schools, charter schools to help them with their menus. I do like recipe analysis as well, or nutrient analysis. So pretty much I'm like the go-to dietitian for all the things.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I mean, honestly, I love dietitians because I feel like we are multifaceted, super talented, and our
Yeah.
career and profession allows us to educate in so many different platforms and
Yeah.
formats, right?
That's what I really enjoy about it. It's like, well, what do I want to work on today?
Yeah,
And getting into entrepreneurship, that's a whole different, thing, marketing and strategy, and that's something I've been learning on a learning curve this year, but I mean, I enjoy it. I mean, that's why I wanted to get out of the hospitals, because I wanted to grow in different ways and new ways, and kind of, not to toot my own horn, but trailblaze this
yesterday.
native nutrition path so that hopefully other native dietitians can, develop their own companies for their own communities, because,
Yeah,
we need more of that. Um,
yeah. Maybe you could be like the mentor for upcoming dietitians,
Yeah, and I'm
tribal
working
dietitians.
on that,
Mhm.
and that's kind of some other behind the scenes stuff I'm doing too,
Nice,
is building up a networking group,
love
um,
it.
because a lot of the native dietitians, because we're located on reservations, it can be feel very isolating,
Yeah,
because, it's we're just stuck in our own thing. In
yeah,
tribal communities, it's
yeah,
hard to like see what else is going on, outside of the reservation. So, but that's also other behind the scenes too, stuff too. I'm hoping next year, or maybe the year after that, I'll start accepting interns to help
Nice.
get community hours for them if they want, or possibly working with other organizations to kind of do a path from them to me to help them get their hours done. So
Nice.
a lot of different things. That's more of like
Lots of
behind
good
the
stuff to
scenes
come.
stuff.
Yeah. Lots of
But
great
like
stuff to
on
come.
the surface, on the face, it's, presentations, cooking classes, food demos.
Yeah. No, I love it. So let's go and look at your profile here on Dietitian Your Way. Love your logo, love the color. It actually matches my my color too, actually. Tumbleweed Nutrition. Ooh, I love this. It's basically a tumbleweed. I
Yeah.
actually looked at this and I was like, that's cute. But now I'm looking at it further. I'm like, oh, it's a tumbleweed. Very cute. Yeah.
Yeah, I called my people are always like, "Why did you call yourself Tumbleweed?" And I'm like, "Well, on the on my res, on the Navajo reservation, there's a lot of tumbleweeds." So I was like, "It reminds me of home."
Yeah.
But now I've come to the story of, how tumbleweeds wander, and I'm like the wandering dietitian,
Yeah.
not
I love it.
affiliated with any organization except my own.
I
And
think
so
I
I
think we'll go with that
and
one.
I roll out.
I love it. Yeah. No, this is great. Very, very cool. Okay, so I see here you have a product. I was looking at this earlier, and tell us a little bit about these discussion cards for dietitians.
Yeah, I developed these discussion cards for dietitians, for dietitians specifically working in tribal communities. Just because, like I said, it's a very niche thing to learn, is how to deliver inclusive care in native communities.
Yeah.
So sometimes, new dietitians, they don't know where to start, they don't know how to start the conversation, and they don't how they don't know how to address certain nutrition challenges that occur on the reservation. So for example, like if somebody doesn't have electricity or running water, there's kind of like a discussion card, and on the back side it has all the different things you could possibly talk about when somebody says they don't have electricity or running water, or they want to incorporate more tribal foods. And so it kind of gives like the dietitian cues for what to talk about. So it's not saying like you have to talk about this, but it just gives people ideas. So this discussion card is meant to be like placed in front of patients. So if a patient comes in or a client comes in and they say, I don't know what to talk about, my doctor just sent me here, then the dietitian can bring out these cards and say, oh,
Oh, that's
I
cute.
have, which topic do you want to talk about? Because for native communities, we're very much visual learners. And we want to see things, like tangible things, and to help us identify or navigate these conversations. So that's kind of what my idea was. And I've used this with my own patients. So this was actually born out of like the clinical setting that I used for my own patients,
Nice.
just because it helps provide that safety for patients too, to know that they just didn't get referred just to talk about their diabetes or their blood sugar or their blood labs. Like there's all these different things we can talk about. So it kind of provides that safety for patients too. And
Yeah, to
again,
let them choose and be involved in the conversation rather than,
right.
what we typically do, which is, here's the education. Ramble
Here's
off.
what you're supposed to be doing,
Yeah.
and you're doing it all wrong. Okay, goodbye. Why aren't you eating enough vegetables?
Right, 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 right.
And that's what patients expect us to do, is to be the food police,
Right.
um, and to just kind of tell you all of these like general guidelines,
Yeah.
But this has 16 different topics. So again, it provides that safety, and it also provides that menu of options, which is very much reflects trauma informed care. Is you want to provide safety, and you want to provide options, just telling them these are all the different things you can do to help improve your health. Which one do you want to focus on? Instead of just saying like, I know the best for you, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
And so it kind of makes it more, my goal is these discussion cards are kind of a way to help the dietitian and patient become more collaborative, um,
Yes.
and to focus in on certain goals that the patient have the
Nice.
patient drive the
Right.
discussion,
Right.
essentially. So that's what I developed this year too, and I sell that on my website as well. And I'm doing a few workshops on how to use it in the future. Because the
Nice.
feedback I've gotten was like, I don't know what to do with it. And I'm like, I thought I explained it, but I'm thinking a
Yeah.
workshop would help
I
people
think so
kind of
too. Yeah. I mean, if I was if my population was Native Americans, I would definitely buy these, because I think I probably wouldn't know where to begin. And also, like you said, provide some safetyness as well to the patient. Let them know this is a safe space, which is pretty important,
yeah,
especially if you're not talking to somebody who doesn't look like them, and
right,
yeah.
right. So right now this is a digital download. Um, in the future, I may consider like making like actual physical products, but I'm kind of right now I'm just getting feedback on how it works in the real world
Yeah.
for dietitians, and that's kind of what the phase I'm in now is how is it working for real life dietitians working in Native communities.
No, but this is all really great. I think you're doing such great work in the community, in the Native American community.
Thank
And I'm so glad that I was able to talk to you for this time, because I honestly didn't even know where to begin with Native American nutrition at all. I was just kind of like, this is going to be an educational session for myself as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
Education.
Yeah, so hopefully, dietitians are listening in, and if they need help, to reach out to you, and reach out to and buy your cards as well.
Yeah.
Um, Anything else you kind of wanted to tell us about Tumbleweed Nutrition or about yourself?
I think we covered a lot of intense stuff.
Yeah,
I think we
yeah,
covered a lot. But I appreciate your support, and I appreciate everybody in my own community support. I've gotten a lot of dietitian support and feedback about what I'm doing, and I think it's great.
yeah. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, well, not talk to you, but ask you, what are some of your favorite foods or your favorite dish?
So I know I'm always like I know I'm harsh towards hummus, like on a public profile, but I love hummus.
Any kind of specific hummus, like hummus from a restaurant, hummus from like a grocery store, hummus that you make at home?
I like hummus from there's a Mediterranean restaurant in Gallup, New Mexico that's really good. It's like the best hummus I've ever had, and I really like hummus. It's like
That's
really smooth, and if there's like extra tahini in there, oh, it's really good stuff. Um, but I'm always making fun of it on my Instagram, but it's just
That's
because
so
I have a
funny.
love-hate relationship with it. But, yeah, and then as far as, like, tribal foods, like, I like fry bread, I like mutton sandwiches,
What is mutton? I meant to ask you that earlier.
sheep. It's
Okay.
Yeah, it's just sheep.
And
So,
it's a sandwich and then anything else inside of it?
they usually do, like, onions or green chili, wrapped in a fry bread. Um, I think it's pretty tasty.
It sounds tasty.
It's pretty intense, but,
Intense in
it's
what way? Like, is it
tasty.
spicy or is it very, like, spiced?
No, it's so with Navajo and many native communities, our cooking is very doesn't have a lot of seasonings or spice.
Oh,
Like
I
the
didn't know
only
that.
Yeah, usually the only seasonings is like salt, maybe pepper. And so,
Wow.
yeah, a lot of people in my community, they don't know how to use like spices or seasonings, which is funny because in like the Navajo community, everybody loves Chinese food or Asian food, and I'm like, that is the most seasoned food ever. So you guys don't even know, and they're like, I don't like spices in my food. I'm like, but you like Chinese food. I don't
Yeah,
understand.
that's so funny. That's
But
really, really
and
funny.
a lot of people, they just don't know how to use seasonings or spices in their
It's
foods
a
because
skill set,
traditionally
yeah.
it's like, we don't, we're just trying to survive here. We don't need
Yeah,
like spices
yeah.
to make our food tastier. Um, but yeah, But I like it's hard for me to choose different foods because I like a lot of different foods. Like I love pizza, like a brick oven pizza that's like charry on the edges, like
Yeah.
cheese.
Thank you so much for hopping on with me to have a discussion. I hope this is going to be some really great education for all the dietitians out there, especially those dietitians who are talking to Native American populations. I think this will be such a great resource. And what is your advice for aspiring dietitians?
Um, my advice for aspiring dietitians is to keep on persisting. And that's what I've learned over the years is if it's something you are really passionate about and you just, like helping people feel good about themselves and feel good about their relationship with food and just keep going, um, and don't give up.
Don't give up. All right. Nice. All right. Well, thank you so much, Deanie. I appreciate you hopping on with me to have a conversation about tumbleweed nutrition and about your path on being a dietitian. For everybody who's watching YouTube, please like and subscribe. And for those listening on the podcast, subscribe as well. And that will be it.
Thank
Okay.
you.